Good evening, everyone. My name is Antonis Katsanos, and I'm the president of the board of the New York Society of the Archaeological Institute of America. I'm also an associate professor of Mediterranean history and archaeology at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, New York University. Now, tonight, our meeting has a double focus. First, we'll start with our annual meeting, and I'm honored to be chairing this. And the second and core part of our meeting tonight is the lecture, a fascinating lecture on the archaeology of New York, and I'll come to this in a bit. But first, I want to call our annual meeting to order. Now, as you see, the next item on the agenda is the review and approval of the meetings of the annual meeting of last year, the meeting which was held on October 13, 2022. You have received the detailed minutes, and I wonder if there are any questions or concerns. And if not, I will invite for approval, which you can do through the chat function.
I'll move acceptance of the minutes.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Jeff and Pam, for this. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, you can open your cameras, also your screens. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for the hand.
Approved.
Approved. Thank you, Sylvia.
Approved.
We have a busy schedule tonight, so I'll try to condense the president's report for the past fiscal year. As you know, we had a very busy season. It was my first season as president. I took over from Dr. Jeffrey Lamia, who has been an invaluable source of advice for me. And I'm happy to say that we hosted, in the previous academic year, we hosted a range of lectures on the archaeology of different parts of the world. And it was successful in the sense that the numbers of attendance rose. And this is, of course, very good. The Zoom fatigue, we could see it had an impact on the attendance of our lectures, but we're happy to see the numbers going up. And we're particularly excited with the attendance in the first lecture of this year, the lecture by Professor Peter van Domenel, which was held in collaboration with the Met, at the Met, and also online. So thanks for your interest in world archaeology. We can have another successful year with our lecture program. You have received detailed information on this, and you will receive reminders as we go. But I have a certain announcement, and this concerns the lecture we had planned for November. Unfortunately, this lecture has to be postponed because of a certain problem with the speaker. So I repeat, the November lecture will not be hosted as planned. Of course, you can keep track with what's happening in the society through our website, and we'll keep sending reminders through especially the good efforts of our board member, Gina Tibat, who I thank a lot for her work on the digital side of our of the work of the society. I also thank her for her work on the newsletter, and I'm very happy to say that we have successfully transitioned to a digital newsletter, which you probably saw. Less than a month ago, we had our first digital issue published. We plan to continue on the digital mode after consulting with all of you, our members, and deciding that this was the right way forward, and will be and this format gives us the possibility to enrich the content of the newsletter, and we plan to invest further on in this direction. Another thing I want to highlight is the work that the society is doing with what we call the Scholars Program. Thanks to the generosity of the friends of our society, we have been in a position to create a program which has been chaired by Dr. Joan Spercher for a few years and is currently chaired by Dr. Celia Berghofen. And this program is about outreach and the engagement of young scholars who are basically undergraduate or beginning graduate students, their engagement with the work of the AIA Society, of the AIA in general, and the work of our society. Now, this program basically is open to matriculated students at universities around New York City, sophomore, junior, and senior undergraduates, and first-year graduate students. We offer fellowships for up to 6 students and who received a 1-year student membership in the AIA and then subscription to our flagship journal, the American Journal of Archaeology, if they desire. We also cover their fees for attending the AIA annual meeting. So this program really promotes the engagement of students with the AIA from a very young age, when we are hoping to build the next generation of AIA or scholars and of specialists in archaeology. On top of these 6 positions, we offer the candidates who have received this fellowship the opportunity to apply for a fieldwork scholarship, a scholarship that that covers the traveling costs to different parts of the world where they conduct fieldwork. And this is a fellowship for $1,500, and it really makes a difference for the engagement of our students with finds and with fieldwork, archaeological fieldwork, but also finds research. The recipient of this fellowship last year was Christos Theodorou, who was finishing the senior year of his BA in classical archaeology at Hunter College. He's a very bright student who has been awarded the Klerev Graduan Prize in Archaeology, and he is a member of the Solomon Blum Scholars Program for high-achieving students within the Hunter College Classics Department. His interests focused on the archaeology of Chalcolithic and Bronze Age Cyprus, and he participated in his first excavation in Cyprus in 2022, at the Bronze Age site of Kynosarga Scalia. Christos was accepted into last year's AIA New York Society Scholars Program, through which he received our research scholarship for summer fieldwork. With this grant, he was able to return to Cyprus and conduct excavations at the late Bronze Age site of Kalavassos Agios Dimitrios. And he will be reporting on this today briefly, but he has also been keeping us informed through various notes we have published in our social media and our website. And you probably through these notes, you're probably already familiar with Christos's work. Now, Christos is currently planning his graduate status, and this opportunity to conduct further fieldwork and engage with professional networks in archaeology has been particularly important. So we are very proud to be supporting the Scholar Scheme. This is something very characteristic of our society. This is not an initiative taken by AIA Central, and we want to see both the initiatives and the students supported for it thrive in their lives and careers. Now I want to invite Christos Theodorou to share his screen and tell us about his fellowship with the AIA New York Society and his fieldwork.
Hi, everybody. Let me share my screen here. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay.
Now you can share, Christos. You can share. Please retry.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen and hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. Good evening. I'll try to keep this very short. Thanks to a generous grant from the AIA New York Society, I participated in the University of British Columbia's excavation at the late Bronze Age site of Kalavassos Agios Dimitrios in Cyprus this past summer. For this short presentation, I'll give you an overview of the site and talk about my involvement in this season's excavation. Prepare yourselves for a barrage of photographs. The site is located in the Vasilikos River Valley on the island's southern coast and dates from roughly 1450 to 1200 BCE, the extent of the late Cypriot II period of the late Bronze Age. Allison South conducted the initial excavations in 1979 in advance of the construction of the Lemessos-Lefkosia Highway. You can see here where the highway cuts through the site. South and her team uncovered a large section of elite residences, non-elite dwellings, and tombs that would ultimately be destroyed by the highway in this area. Work would continue here until 1998 and revolved around a monumental court-centered ashlar building and its surrounding structures. Building 10, as it's called, was the administrative center of an estimated 10-hectare settlement. The central court shows evidence of large-scale feasting events, the remnants of which were deposited in a nearby well. The Pithos Hall was a storeroom that held massive ceramic containers, which studies show contained olive oil. This storeroom's total volume of olive oil is estimated at 35,000 liters. Combined with another storeroom annexed to the north, the full storage capacity at KAD was close to 50,000 liters of oil. I like this artist's representation of the Pithos Hall, as it includes the mud brick wall that may have been used to access the openings of the Pithoi. It's incredible that portions of this wall still remain. A large stone tank embedded in the floor of a nearby room may have been part of the building's oil production area. I worked in this area a great deal, helping with an energetic study of the ashlar masonry. Moving on, a road, seen here in blue, led from the southern extent of the excavations and terminated at Building 10. Rich tombs lay beneath the road here, filled with lavish grave goods, including local fineware, Mycenaean pictorial-style craters, and Egyptian gold and ivory. Currently, Dr. Kevin Fisher leads the project, where the focus is to explore new areas surrounding Building 10. The excavations at KAD are part of a broader interdisciplinary study of urban landscapes between sites in 2 adjacent river valleys. You can see Calabasas on the left and Moroni on the right, another site from the same period. Through the Calabasas and Moroni Built Environments Project, or CAMBI, teams from the University of British Columbia, Cornell University, and the universities of Chicago and Southampton work to understand the varying trajectories neighboring sites undertook towards urbanization in Cyprus during the Late Bronze Age. The 2023 season at KAD was split into 2 components. The first was to excavate a new unit to expose more of the road and flanking buildings leading up to Building 10. Previous work in this area uncovered a segment of road, a stone-lined drain running through the middle of the road, orthostates lining the walls next to the road, and adjacent buildings. Here are a few slides showing our progress throughout the month. And this is the completed unit. Notice how thick the plaster of the road is on the left slide. The second component of the excavation, where I primarily worked, was to reach the floor level of a previously excavated room in a building to the southwest of Building 10. This room was rife with exciting finds, and I honed my excavation skills here, documenting, removing, and processing many local and imported ceramics, faunal remains, including lots of deer antler, small unfired clay objects believed to be sling bullets, and other cultural artifacts typical of Late Bronze Age Cyprus. The list of new techniques I learned and the old ones I sharpened would be exhausting to list for you. The experience I gained was enriching and will certainly be helpful in future projects. Off-site, we took trips that helped broaden my knowledge of Cypriot archaeology and history. At the Larnaca District Archaeological Museum, we discussed the region's history and compared the artifacts we were excavating with intact and cleaned equivalents on display. I also took the opportunity to attend the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute's annual workshop. This event featured 24 scholars presenting their work. One afternoon, in return, I took the director and supervisors on a whirlwind tour of the Olive Press and Flour Mill Museum in the neighboring village of Azgata, where my family lives, and to the copper mines surrounding the Vasilikos River Valley. It was a funny afternoon. This was all during a lunch break, and we got lost many times in the hills. And here's our unit on the last day. We exposed new architectural features and more of that large stone round feature you see on the lower right. Anyway, wrapping up, I want to express my sincerest gratitude to the AIA-NYS for their support, and to Project Director Kevin Fisher and Field Supervisor Sherry Pack for welcoming me to their team. It was an honor to work in a region of the island where I have such deep familial connections. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Christos. This was it was exciting to see the project you were involved with, but also to understand the great work that you did last summer, and how to reflect on how this experience helped shape your career in archaeology. So
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
With this, we pass to the next item on the agenda, which is the Treasurer's Report by John Yarmick. I want to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to John, who has been instrumental in helping for a smooth transition between our former treasurer, Professor Pam Crabtree, and our current treasurer, Dr. Matthew Brown. And let me share my screen. Yes, and show the budget, which we already shared with you. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonis, and good evening, everyone. I'll keep my remarks brief. You have before you our financial report for the last fiscal year, which ended on August 31st. And I will just highlight a few key accounts. You will see, of course, that we finished the year with a modest surplus of $979. If you look at income, The first item, remittances from AIA headquarters. This has always been the rebate we get on membership fees paid for members who join AIA. I would love to say that the increase from 903 to 1785 was due to a large increase in the number of members. Unfortunately, that is not the case. In fact, our membership levels are largely the same. The reason for the large increase is AIA changed the manner in which they pay out honorariums to lecturers in the National Lecture Program for those lecturers who come to New York. We had a few last year. In prior years, AIA Boston would just pay the honoraria directly. Now they give us the money and we pay it. And that's the reason for the increase. It washes out. The money we get, we spend, and the expense is in the lecture programs. The other income item that's important to note, and one that I'd like to stress, are the contributions we get from our friends. Heidi Fisher manages our Friends program for us. We have very loyal donors, some of whom are on tonight's call, and their support, Antonis mentioned how their support helps us with our Scholars program. And as you can see, it really is covering most of our expenses. So we are really grateful to them for their continuing support of our society, our programs and activities. On the expense side, I'll highlight the lecture programs are slightly increased. However, it's important to point out that the lecture programs for last year and the year before were Zoom-based. In prior years, when we had in-person lectures, our expenses were appreciably higher. We are reintroducing in-person lectures this year, and so in future years, you can expect to see this particular account growing a bit more. The other item that is important to note, Antonis mentioned that we moved to digital newsletter, and as you can see, the printing and mailing of our former newsletters was rather expensive, the most expensive expense item. So we are saving a bundle by going to digital, and that, of course, as Antonis said, gives us an opportunity to enhance the newsletter even further. You can also see the expenses of the Scholars program. You'll note that fiscal 22, there was a considerably higher expense. That's because that year we had two scholarships. The scholarship of the prior year was deferred because of COVID. And so in 22, we had two scholarships. In 23, we're back to one, and $1,500 to Christos, and we'll be continuing that this year as well. That's basically it. At the bottom of this page, you'll see our financial position with our checking account and savings account. And we also have, thanks to Ira Haupt, who, as you all probably know, passed away earlier this year. He was my predecessor as treasurer. And I want to say maybe at least 15, perhaps more years ago, he and other loyal donors and friends of the society got together and created an endowment. It is named in his honor because he was the largest contributor to that endowment. It is managed for us by AIA Boston and incorporated into their investment management. It is currently valued at $86,000. It's been holding its own. We have not had an endowment draw for a number of years because of the loyalty of our friends covering most of our expenses and our own balances in our savings account. But the board is looking at initiatives that will allow us to begin to utilize this money more and enhance our programming even further. That's my report. If anyone has any questions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. That was very illuminating. The next item in the agenda is governance. The society board is basically nominating the three dear colleagues for joining the board or having a new position in the board, and we ask our members to ratify these recommendations. And these three colleagues I mentioned are Dr. Jeffrey Lamia, who is transitioning from past president, to general trustee, Professor Pam Crabtree, who is transitioning from treasurer to general trustee, and Dr. Matthew Brown, who is joining us as treasurer. Can I have a motion, please, and somebody to second?
I'll move that we accept all of the nominations.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good.
Aye.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I see some hands. Yeah, this brings us to the last item, which is other business. I have a couple of notes, and if anyone wants to raise some other business, please let me know. So these notes include the increasing interest that our board is taking into the history of our society. And you will see this interest being manifested in different ways in the months to come, which can include notes about past presidents or important society members in our newsletter, to work on our archive. We are very much interested to making our archive accessible and digitizing it, and so on and so forth. That's my first. My second note regards the board members who haven't been mentioned so far in today's event, and these include Paul Zimmerman, who is our IT guru and makes things like the Zoom platform work for us. Timothy Pugh and Francesco De Angelis, colleagues in different universities in the New York City area, who are always there to advise and the society on the development of its business. Is there any other business that somebody wants to bring forward? Well, if not, the meeting is adjourned, and we pass to the introduction of our speaker. Our speaker for tonight, and I'll just stop sharing and invite her to share her own PowerPoint. Now, our speaker for tonight is Amanda Sutphin, who was an MA in anthropology from the Pennsylvania State University, an MA in anthropology from the Barnard College, Columbia University, and a Master of Social Work in Casework from the Hunter College School of Social Work. Amanda Sutphin is the director of the Archaeology Department of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Her department focuses upon New York City's archaeological heritage and is responsible for determining when and what archaeology is needed for projects subject to relevant environmental review regulations and landmarks law. It also manages the New York City Archaeological Repository, the Nan A. Rothschild Research Center, which houses over 1 million artifacts. As director of the Archaeology Department, Amanda has been coordinating archaeology policy with other government agencies and also with developers. She has raised nearly $1 million to establish and support the repository and an associated project. And she has been very active in communicating the results of her work on the website of the department, and also through lectures like the present one and publications. Her published research focuses on archaeological method and fieldwork in the US and Britain, with special focus on the archaeology of New York City and the work of the New York City Archaeological Repository. Most recently, in 2022, she co-authored the ebook Buried Beneath the City, an archaeological history of New York. This book was the winner of the 2023 Society for American Archaeology Popular Book Award. Amanda has lectured extensively on this work and on other projects of hers in different venues around New York City and also nationally and internationally. She has been a member for the AIA. She's also a member for the Society for Historical Archaeology, the Council for Northeastern Historical Archaeology, and the Metropolitan Chapter for New York State Archaeological Association. Her lecture tonight is titled Buried Beneath the City, an Archaeological History of New York. Please join me in giving our speaker a warm virtual welcome. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to talk about the archaeology of New York City. So tonight I'm going to be talking about how and why archaeology happens, and I'll be providing a few highlights about how the archaeological study of New York has revealed information about the ever-evolving city. And I'm also going to talk about the work of the New York City Archaeological Repository, the Nan A Rothschild Research Center. As mentioned, I am the Director of Archaeology for the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and Landmarks was established in 1965 when Mayor Robert Wagner signed a local law creating the commission and giving it its power. The Landmarks Law was enacted in response to New Yorkers' growing concern that important physical elements of the city's history were being lost, including Penn Station, which is shown here. Its loss was profound, and as the architectural historian Vincent Scully said, when it entered the city like a god, and one now scuttles in like a rat. The commission's responsible for protecting the city's architecturally, historically, and culturally significant buildings and sites by granting them landmark status, and then regulates proposed changes. An archaeologist joined the staff in 1980, and the archaeology department was created in 2002, and we now have 3 staff members. We also manage the New York City Archaeological Repository, the Nan A Rothschild Research Center, and hereafter I'm just going to refer to it as the repository, which was created in 2014 by Landmarks. Its mission is to curate the city's significant archaeological collections and to make them accessible by appointments to scholars and to university classes, and to everyone through our website, which is nyc.gov/archaeology. We also have 2 additional grant-funded staff members who work in the repository, and 2 fantastic volunteers, including your very own John Yarmick. And I want to mention Carol Weed too, who I believe is watching tonight. Very gracious of them both, and we really are very grateful to their work. This slide shows a few artifacts, including Chinese export porcelain and transfer wear plates on the left, a university class visit in the middle, and on the right is an image of the repository. Archaeology has happened in what is now New York City since the 19th century. However, while many archaeologists lived in New York City in the 19th and early 20th century, most of them focused on other parts of the world, such as Egypt. And so the work that happened in the city was generally done by avocational archaeologists, including Stanley Wisniewski, who's pictured here excavating at the Graham Court site in College Point. These avocational archaeologists, and I define that term as people who made their livings through other means and were generally not formally trained as archaeologists, largely focused on documenting Indigenous people sites and areas that were associated with the Revolutionary War. The work was essential, as many of those sites were subsequently developed and would be completely unknown without their work. But it should be known they did not generally employ the methodologies or ethics that today's professionals would. And while there were a few professional archaeologists working in the city from the 19th century on, arguably it wasn't until the 1970s that the modern era of New York City urban archaeology emerged. As defined by Bert Solon, then at NYU, it was the study of the city, not just in the city, which is a crucial difference, as archaeologists began to focus on the development of the city itself. A great example is the discovery shown here. This is an image of archaeologists with AKRF standing on a late 18th century sloop that was found at the World Trade Center site in 2010. The ship was used to create landfill, so literally helping to build the city, and after its discovery, it was removed by the archaeological team for conservation, and it's to be exhibited at the New York State Museum. Before we get to the legal underpinnings of how archaeology generally happens in New York, I wanted to note the city's archaeological work follows the same process, irrespective of the trigger for the work, which is that there's initial screen done by archaeologists at LPC to determine what might be at the site and whether a proposed project subject to the laws we'll talk about could impact those resources. Then, if there is potential, the next step is a documentary research report completed by archaeological consultants, which is a fine-grained site history that considers what happened at the site and what may remain. And then testing happens to see what's actually on the ground. Landmarks reviews that as well as the work plans for each subsequent phase that are completed by consultants. And if something significant is found, the final phase is either full excavation and/or project redesign. That last step also often includes measures to share what's been learned with the public, such as exhibitions for the development of curricula. And I wanted to note the archaeological reports, which now number over 1,700, are available through Landmarks' website, with just a few exceptions where we're concerned about looting. The other resource I want to note are the guidelines pictured here, which are on Landmarks' website, and they outline how and why archaeology occurs, as well as the standards needed for each step. Now to the legal underpinnings. Archaeology usually occurs through the environmental review process, and the relevant local, state, and federal laws are noted here. These laws ensure that government and agencies consider the potential impacts of their proposed projects on a range of environmental review issues, including archaeology. Landmarks reviews those proposed projects and considers the potential impact on historic resources, which also includes standing structures. And if there may be an impact on archaeological resources, the Archaeology Department oversees the ensuing work. This image is of Corlears Hook Park, which is in the Lower East Side, and where archaeological fieldwork was recently completed by NV5 as part of the East Side Access Coastal Resiliency Project. The project is subject to environmental review, and it was originally thought the site had the potential to contain resources associated with Indigenous occupation and colonial resources, as well as 19th century resources. But ultimately, 19th century archaeological features were found, including foundations of a sugar refinery that was established on the site of an iron foundry, shown at the forefront of this photo, and backyard resources associated with the houses that were constructed on the block in the 1820s and 1830s, and they stood at the site until the block was demolished at the end of the 19th century to build Corlears Hook Park. The analysis is now underway, again by NV5, and once completed, the report will be posted on the website, and there will be signage at the park to share what the work has revealed about the city's past, and the project is also developing relevant curricula. Archaeology may also happen at designated sites where archaeological resources are protected. Archaeology was completed by Joan Geismar as part of the reconstruction of Washington Square Park, as that park is known to have potential to contain archaeological resources, including from its use as a potter's field from 1797 to 1825. This photo is of an exhibit that was unveiled just 3 weeks ago in the park, and it showcases the headstone of James Jackson. He was an Irish immigrant who died in 1799 from yellow fever. The archaeological discovery of the stone in 2009 led to research that revealed that the city only allowed the burial of people who died during epidemics to occur within the Potter's Field as a way to protect public health. And this was, of course, in a time before germ theory was understood. To learn more about this discovery, you can visit the exhibit at Washington Square Park or check out the archaeological report and associated collection on the repository's website. And I should also mention that there were human remains that were found during the project as well, and they were reinterred in the park in 2021. New York City archaeology can also occur in response to academic inquiry, and landmarks will be involved if the work is on public land or requires permits. The Seneca Village project is a good example of that. For those that don't know, Seneca Village was a community settled by Black people in 1825, at a time when some Black people were still enslaved in New York State. The village was located about 3 miles from the then densely settled area of Lower Manhattan, and it was displaced in 1857 when the city of New York acquired the land through eminent domain to build Central Park. Newspaper accounts from the mid-19th century depicted it as a shanty town that was not worth saving, but the archaeology and associated historical research indicate that depiction was wrong and racist, and that there had been a strong community where many residents owned their homes, and the church was at the center of life. This image shows the excavations completed as part of the field school in 2011 of what were later to be determined the yards of the Webster and Phillips families, as shown in the 19th century map on the right. The archaeological fieldwork was directed by Nan Rothschild and Diana Wall as part of the Seneca Village project, and research is still being conducted by a committee of scholars and community members to assess and better understand the traces that the community left. The archaeological collections at the repository and can be accessed through our website, and we also have an associated digital exhibit. I also wanted to bring to your attention that there's a new state law which went into effect in August. It stipulates that when human remains are discovered during construction, work must cease and the local coroner must be contacted. And if they determine the burial is more than 50 years old, the New York State archaeologist must be contacted. And if the remains could be of indigenous ancestry, then the burial committee created through the law must weigh in. The act also includes criminal penalties for violations. This is an important change, as previously there was no clear protections for unmarked burials. But I do want to note that for projects where archaeology was required, we have long sought to ensure that a descended community is part of the process, and that thought is given to the respectful treatment of human remains at each step. Also, this photo is a complete misnomer, as the law is for unmarked burials, and not ones like this, which is from Trinity Churchyard in Lower Manhattan. But I use this image because I really like it. The gravestone dates from 1767, and like archaeological artifacts can be used to learn more about the past. This one, for example, only notes that Mary Dazzle was her husband's wife, which was typical for 18th century British traditions, whereas her Dutch counterpart in that same period would likely also have included her birth name. And this indicates important cultural and gender differences within the New York of the colonial era. I'm now going to give an overview of the types of sites and artifacts that we commonly encounter in New York City. And let's begin with what's been uncovered about the lifeways of indigenous peoples that lived in the area for thousands of years. As previously noted, most of the indigenous sites we know about were excavated decades ago as the city expanded into areas, such as Inwood in northern Manhattan, that had not experienced much development and were becoming urbanized at the time. However, there were certainly some sites that remain, such as Apawakang Mananahang Island Protected from the Wind Archaeological Site, which was designated in 2021 and was in use for thousands of years. The site is within Conference House Park, which is in Staten Island, and the LPC consulted with the Delaware Nation, the Delaware Tribe of Indians, and the Stockbridge-Munsee Community Band of Mohicans, who are all federally recognized as being descended from the people who once lived here. New York State has also recognized these tribes, as well as the Shinnecock and the Unkechick Nation. I want to note that the name, which is Old Munsee, had been recorded in colonial records as found by Robert Gourmet and noted in his Munsee Indians: A History, as being what the Munsee called Staten Island and perhaps a village that was on the site. The Delaware Tribe of Indians consulted with the Lenape Talking Dictionary to define the place name and to correctly spell it. and the city does consult the tribal nations for work that could impact Indigenous materials. As for historic sites, I think this is what people often think of when they think of New York City urban archaeology, which are these large block-wide digs. This photo is an overview of the 7 Hanover and Stadhuis excavations completed in Lower Manhattan. 7 Hanover is in the foreground, and Stadhuis is in the upper right. So this is 7 Hanover, and this is Stadhuis. Both occurred over 40 years ago, and in addition to demonstrating that intact archaeological resources remain even within the city's most densely developed areas, they both uncovered very significant colonial to 19th century artifacts that are now curated in the repository, and a few of which will be mentioned tonight. Stadhuis was co-directed by Nan Rothschild and Diana Long, and 7 Hanover by Nan Rothschild. This image is of a cobbled surface found at the Bound House in Flushing, Queens. And today the Bound House is a house museum that was built in 1661 with later additions. It was built by John Bound, who was known as being the defender of religious freedom because he defied Governor Stuyvesant's ban on the, quote, abominable sect, unquote, of Quakerism, and was subsequently tried and acquitted. Archaeology has been completed at the site a few times under Landmarks review as it is a designated site. The cobbled surface was found in 2012 by Historical Perspectives, and I want to note the site is unusual for New York in that it still contains its colonial structure, and so has not experienced the cycles of development more common throughout the city. This site type, on the other hand, is far more common, which is water infrastructure. This particular example is an 18th century well that was found behind City Hall and that was repurposed in the 19th century to be a dry well. You can see the 19th century drain at the upper right here. Typically, when public water lines are built, features like this are abandoned, and people fill them with garbage so they can act as a time capsule from the period they were filled. City Hall Park has been excavated multiple times because it's within the African Burial Ground and Commons Historic District, which is an archaeological historic district where Landmarks regulates proposed changes to the archaeological resources. And many remarkable discoveries have been made, and the collections are at the repository. The work shown here was done by what was then URS and is now ACOM, working with Christos archaeological consultants. Now on to some examples of artifacts. When the Dutch colonized the area in the 17th century, they brought their material world with them, from the houses they built to the objects they furnished them with. The objects on the left are building materials imported from the Netherlands that were used to construct a distinct Dutch urban streetscape that persisted in Lower Manhattan into the 18th century. And they include a pan tile or roofing tile, a yellow Dutch brick, and a green glazed floor tile. The object on the right is a decorative tin glazed tile with a biblical scene from the Old Testament. These type of decorative tiles were used in fireplace surrounds or along baseboards and were typical Dutch decorations that also guided religious belief and practices of the home. This was found in Battery Park in Lower Manhattan during the South Ferry Terminal project. The project was completed by AKRF, Dewberry, and Linda Stone. Housewares also assumed familiar Dutch forms. These 2 earthenware jugs would have been used to serve wine or ale, and they were found in Lower Manhattan in what had been the basement of the late 17th century Lovelace Tavern, found at the Stadhuis site. They both have retained their Dutch form, which may be familiar from Dutch genre paintings of the time. When they were first found, the vessels were thought to have been imported from the Netherlands, but later scientific study revealed they were made in New York City, but using the Dutch form. And this is an example of why archaeological repositories are so important, as they ensure that future research can be done using new technologies to reveal more about the past. And yes, these 2 are curated by the repository. And I do want to note that the foundations of the Lovelace Tavern can be seen at 85 Broad Street. This glass wine bottle seal has the Raleigh symbol of Governor Fletcher, who was New York's governor in the 1690s. And I wanted to mention it for 2 reasons. 1, because the artifact can be linked to its owner, and 2, because Governor Fletcher is likely best known as being recalled to Great Britain for consorting with pirates. It was excavated in Battery Park as part of the South Ferry Terminal project. On the left is a terracotta sugar mold that was found in Whitehall Street in Lower Manhattan and led archaeologists to research New York City's role in the sugar trade. Sugar cane was grown in the Caribbean by enslaved workers and was exported for processing. At that time, raw sugar would be boiled, rolled in molds like this, and then white clay slip would be poured to remove impurities and refine the sugar. The byproduct, molasses, would be sold separately. The artifact on the right is a punch bowl used for rum or brandy and citrus-based drinks. They are byproducts of the sugar production and were very, very common drinks in the colonial era and early 19th century, especially in a time before the city's water supply was both adequate and clean. And I want to note that as slavery was legal in New York State until 1827, it's quite possible that enslaved workers were involved with each step throughout the entire process. We can also tie together different types of information. For example, documentary history says little about the lives of Black people in early New York City. The excavation of the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan in the early 1990s, location shown in the 1755 map, yielded more than 400 burials that were analyzed to reveal some of the physical stresses people lived with. DNA indicated African origin of adults, and other studies revealed the harsh conditions of the children born in New York, many of whom did not survive infancy. The artifacts on the left are shroud pins, which were found in City Hall Park and associated with another colonial burial ground, which was located in what is shown in the commons in the map above. Burials were covered in shrouds that were pinned and then usually placed into single wooden coffins. Shroud pins were the most common burial-related artifact found in the African burial ground. And if you wish to know more, please visit the National Monument at 290 Broadway. The objects on the left are ceramic crucibles for melting silver associated with the workshop of Simeon Soumain, which was once located at what is today 7 Hanover Square, which I mentioned earlier. The silver tea caddy set on the right was made by Soumain circa 1720 and is part of the collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Archaeology is invaluable in documenting everyday objects like the crucibles, which can shed light on silversmithing, whereas, as you might guess, objects like the tea caddy are rarely found in the city's archaeological record, as they're often passed down as heirlooms or sold. The discovery of Soumain's workshop led archaeologists to study his family and household, and his family was part of the diaspora of Protestant Huguenots who were expelled from Catholic France between 1680 to 1690. They came to New York in 1685, and he set up his workshop by 1709. He and his wife had many children, 6 of which died in the smallpox epidemic of 1730, and they are interred at Trinity, which I mentioned earlier. Soumain was an enslaver, and Tom, who was enslaved by Soumain, was expelled from New York after the New York Conspiracy of 1740. Other forms of manufacturing were more anonymous. These bone artifacts are remnants of the button-making process, and a finished 4-hole button was one of the activities inmates of the almshouse were made to do. The almshouse was located where City Hall now stands and was in use from 1735 to 1797, likely using that well we saw earlier. And it was for people who were deemed unable to care for themselves. While we do not know who worked these buttons, they helped to illuminate the lives of the people of the almshouse. Archaeology has also helped to reveal glimpses into New York's long and important military history. On the left side is an outline of contemporary street grid of Battery Park and its surrounding streets in Lower Manhattan, overlaying a 1776 Ratzer map depicting New York in 1766 to 1767. The red lines are showing elements of the 1755 fortifications that were archaeologically documented by the South Ferry Terminal Project. On the right are 2 Revolutionary War enlisted men's buttons that were found during the same project. The one on the left says USA and was worn by a Continental or American soldier, while the one on the right was worn by a British soldier who was part of the 31st Regiment of Foot, who saw action at Fort Ticonderoga and Saratoga. The revolution shattered the city and turned it into a battlefield. Fires destroyed more than 1/3 of the city, and the British occupied it for most of the war. Evacuation Day, November 25th, 1783, almost 240 years ago, marked the date when the British left the city and was an annual holiday in New York for many years after. New York then played an important role in the development of the United States. It was here that the Congress of Confederation met in 1785, and here where George Washington was sworn in as the first president in 1789. It was also here the nation's banking system was developed, and of course, New York is still an important financial center. These ceramic fragments were found in Lower Manhattan and indicate the burgeoning and developing sense of patriotism, although it should be noted that both were actually made in England for the American market. The figure on the right is Columbia, was often used to represent America after the war, and many items were festooned with images of George Washington, as shown on the left, including ceramics and furniture. Archaeology has also shed light on New York's changing economy. In the 19th century, New York was a production center, and the extent revealed in time, and the extent increased in time as artifacts can reveal. On the left is a stoneware pot that was manufactured in Manhattan Wells, which is near today's Foley Square in Lower Manhattan. It was made sometime between 1791 and 1830 by John Remy III, who came from a family of German-descended potters who, along with the Crolius family, brought German methodologies to New York. On the right is a price list of third-generation Clarkson Crolius, a stoneware potter who also worked at Manhattan Wells. And here he's advertising the sale of pots, jugs, and jars. Stonewares were essential for food storage in a time before refrigerators and Tupperware, and they stored everything from flour to pickles. This particular pot was excavated by Brooklyn College's Archaeological Field School in the early 1990s, directed by Arthur Bankoff and Fred Winter. And Dr. Kelly Britt at Brooklyn College is now reanalyzing the collection, which is part of the repository's collections. And I wanted to mention that the Van Cortlandt House is a house museum, and they are hosting an Archaeology and History in Action Day on Saturday, October 28th, in case you're interested. Here was another example of a stoneware jar made in Lower Manhattan. This particular one was made by free black potter Thomas Commerell between 1793 and 1819, and it was found by archaeologists with Chrysalis Archaeological Consultants in Fulton Street. The tri-lobe tassel was Commerell's trademark. Thomas Commerell was born enslaved by second-generation stoneware potter William Crolius, but was manumitted with his parents and siblings in 1778. Likely trained at the Crolius pottery, Commerell established his own pottery in Corlier's Hook in the Lower East Side. And I wanted to mention that the Corlier's Hook Park project did uncover more of his work, but not his pottery, which was located across the street from the park. His identity as a free black man is revealed in the 1800 and 1810 New York State Census, shown here on the right, where he's recorded as black after his name rather than identified in the column reserved for enslaved individuals. In 1820, he left New York and went to Sierra Leone as a founding leader of a settlement sponsored by the American Colonization Society. The 1800 and 1820 census records also revealed that, like Commerell, other free black families resided in the Lower East Side and were likely connected through business, church, and family. One of Commerell's neighbors was Daniel Jackson Johnson, and he was a free black oysterman who sold fresh and pickled oysters that were packaged in stoneware oyster jars like these. These oyster jars were found in the same deposit as the Thomas Commerell showed in the last slide. They were made locally and used to pickle and store New York oysters that were shipped to places like Philadelphia, Charleston, the Caribbean, Guyana, and Suriname. The jars were sealed with cork, and then wax was placed into the well. Pickled oysters were very popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, and to date, these are the only such jars found in an archaeological context. The objects also speak to the importance of having a repository, as they were not initially identified as being oyster jars until they were further studied at once at the repository. And speaking of oysters, these large oysters died in the 18th century and lived for between 20 to 30 years. Oysters produce a growth break for every year of life, and so one can count them to estimate life at death. Studying oyster shells can provide important information about the environment of New York's waters. And oystering was a very important food source and industry well into the 19th century, and the colonial era they were particularly plentiful and cheap, and everyone ate them in a variety of ways. Animal bones also reveal what species were in the environment and how the environments changed through time. This example was found at South Ferry, and it's a clavicle from a passenger pigeon. There were once so many passenger pigeons that when the flocks flew by, the skies would darken. These birds have been hunted for centuries, but it was not until the second part of the 19th century when people began commercially hunting them on a large scale and they began altering their birds' habitat, the bird population crashed. And in 1914, the passenger pigeon was declared extinct. Finding organic material other than bones and shells, such as burlap, on an archaeological site in New York City is rare, but sometimes such things are discovered. A fragment of one was preserved in charcoal as illustrated in the close-up on the right, and was once part of George A. Gannett's stock. He advertised in the December 1st, 1835 edition of the New York Journal of Commerce that 10,000 gunny bags were for sale in his shop at 52 Water Street. 15 days later, his burlap bags went up in flames, a casualty of the Great Fire of 1835, which impacted the site of 7 Hanover Square. Following the Great Fire, Gannett moved his operation east to 175 Water Street, and then relocated with his family to St. Louis. Urban archaeologists draw upon a bevy of archival sources to identify and contextualize artifacts excavated in the city, including historic newspapers, city directories, and land conveyance records. Sometimes, however, the personal details of individuals remain elusive, as is the name of the person who used and lost this 19th century short-stemmed Turkish pipe. The bowl of the pipe stands vertically, and while a hollow reed missing would have been inserted at the opening at a 45-degree angle. The pipe is marked Kazar, which is in southeastern Slovakia, where it was likely made before 1850. This pipe may have belonged to a laborer working on the construction, the builder's trench, of a water trough at the Stadhuis site, but whose it was and how it got to New York is a mystery. These are patent medicine bottles found at the Van Cortlandt House excavations and are indicative of the family's attempts to self-treat illness at home. The bottle on the left, Osgood's, was marketed to purify the blood and cure those suffering from bilious climates, bilious diseases, such as fevers and headaches. Beware of imitators, Osgood warns us in his 1865 treatise, as illustrated on the right. The middle bottle contained O'Toole's cough medicine, which was marketed as curing a wide range of illnesses, including tuberculosis, which did not have a cure then. And one on the right is Ayer's cherry pectoral cough medicine, which was marketed for coughs, croup, asthma, and sore throats, and initially included heroin, morphine, and alcohol as its ingredients. The archaeological discovery of objects like these can indicate health concerns of people who once lived at the site and are rarely recorded. Now that I've shown you a very small sample of the artifacts curated at the repository, I wanted to share some additional information about the repository and our work. To begin with, we do have about 1 million artifacts from over 40 archaeological projects that were primarily completed in the last 40 years, and our space is in Midtown in a fully climate-controlled space that was donated by the Durst organization. The collections are either from sites owned by the city and/or the responsibility of the city to curate. We take the legacy collections as they are, and while some were completed to the standards of the day and well curated, many were left incomplete and were very poorly stored. The initial step is to triage the collections to ensure they will not contaminate the other collections and to immediately rehouse as needed. Then our goal is to bring them into a standardized database, which is searchable through the associated website, nyc.gov/archaeology as shown here. And our current initiatives are to make more of the 7 Hanover Square and Stadhuis collections accessible. And we're developing a cataloging template so new collections can be quickly made accessible. And while you can find links to archaeological reports and search through the archaeological artifacts from many of our collections, we're now working on making other types of archaeological data appropriately accessible, such as context information, and are considering whether and how to add other types of archaeological data, like field and lab records. I also want to note that the website has other features that may be of interest, such as virtual exhibits, the ability to use a map to search for sites, a timeline that we're starting to build out that links artifacts to historic events, and perhaps surprisingly, one of the most popular features are quizzes about the collections and archaeology. Thank you for listening, and for more information, please do check out our website that I've mentioned multiple times, as well as our book, Buried Beneath the City, An Archaeological History of New York, co-written by Nan Rothschild and 3 archaeologists from LPC, including Arthur Benkoff, Jessica McLean, and me. You can also reach me at Sutphin, Sutphin, at lpc.nyc.gov. Now I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I think I represent everyone to in saying how exciting this lecture has been. What an eye opener, especially for those of us not familiar with the archaeology of the city. If we were in person, I'm sure there would be a very warm round of applause. But in this transitional period, we'll have to do with clapping hands that several members of the audience shared. You gave us a range of beautiful and mundane objects and the stories behind them. I'm sure people will be interested in different aspects of the presentation. So please, I invite questions from the audience. Yeah, Joanne, yes, please, go ahead. Joanne, you're muted, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this comprehensive talk. In practical archaeological terms, well, I have 2 questions. Number one, in practical archaeological terms, are you going to run out of storage space? It seems like there is so much stuff in storage already, and I'm sure that there is always more coming in. And I guess the other side of the question is, could you say just a bit about current projects that are underway at this time in the 5 boroughs, or things that you're looking forward to? So storage and current projects.
Sure. So yes, storage is a massive issue. Our repository is getting full. We're hoping we may have more space soon. We don't have that promise yet, but that's definitely an issue. The second question, I think the analysis of Corlears Hook Park, which I discussed, I think I'm most interested to see what more they learn about the site as they actually start analyzing those artifacts. They've just finished washing them, which, considering how many they have, is a big feat. There is other testing going on now. There's some in Van Cortlandt Park. There's the Stockbridge-Munsee. There's an important battle during the Revolutionary War. Many Stockbridge-Munsee members were killed during that battle and were buried. So there's concern about any work that happens in the park and learning more about that history. So that work is ongoing. Yeah, and then there's some things that often archaeology should never happen in deep winter in New York, but often it does because of trying to fit it in with the developer schedule. So that's the only work that's happening now, and hopefully there's a few things that happen sooner rather than later.
So the majority of these projects come under the category of rescue archaeology in response to one project or another or building projects that are underway.
Right, most of them are done in response to development projects, yes, that are subject to either environmental review or that come to landmarks because they're on designated sites. And so part of the approval, like at Washington Square Park, was that they would do the archaeology as part of the approval for that reconstruction. And I'm sorry, there are now millions of sirens. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
And then occasionally there are projects like the Seneca Village project, which are done because of academic inquiry. I'm so sorry, that is so loud. Yeah.
It's New York.
It is, so that's, I think, coming from the Brooklyn Bridge. Right now I'm sitting in my glamorous offices of the Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is 1 Center Street right by the Brooklyn
Thank you, Amanda. I must say to the audience that they can just raise a hand and appear to ask the questions themselves, like Joan just did, or type the question in the chat box. Speaking of which, I want to read a couple of messages. First from Michelle Kidwell Gilbert, who is congratulating you. And second, from Sheldon Skaggs, who's asking, what would be required to have a field school on a CUNY campus?
First of all, thank you, Michelle. And secondly, for the CUNY campus, that's actually a good question. I think we would be involved, but I'm not sure if there would be any environmental review triggered. But because it's owned public, because it's city land, I think we would still be involved. So I think you just need to come to us, explain what it is you want to do, and then you can proceed. I think we're of course very supportive of field schools. It's essential for young archaeologists, of course. I do like to see, though, that plans for the actual analysis and curation of the artifacts that are found, because sometimes, as we all know, sometimes that doesn't happen with field schools. Not that I'm casting aspersions on anyone here.
Can I ask a broader question from ignorance? How the setup you have built is impressive. How common or uncommon is it for the standards of other big American cities?
That's a great question. Boston has an archaeologist that's part of their Boston Landmarks Commission. It's a little bit different. They also have an archaeological laboratory. They're not so involved with environmental review projects, though. They tend to be done more at the state level in Massachusetts versus the city. But there's certainly another example. Alexandria, Washington, D.C., they both have archaeological programs. But it's not that common. There's some cities like Philadelphia you would think would have city archaeologists and don't. Although National Park Service does own parts of Philadelphia, and they of course do archaeology. Downtown Philadelphia, I mean.
Thank you.
So it's not super common.
Yes. It really sounded that you have something special here, and that it's great to know.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from our audience? That's your chance. Well, if not, we have to thank the speaker profusely for her very interesting lecture and for her patience during our board meeting. And I think next time we walk around the city, different parts of the city, we'll see them with a new perspective. So thank you again, Amanda, and I'm applauding and representing everyone in doing so. Thank you once more.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.